America, we have a serious problem with opioid use. Being a 20-year law enforcement officer, I've seen firsthand how these drugs have destroyed families. This epidemic isn't just affecting our youth. Our parents, siblings, friends, and neighbors are struggling with this problem also. Hello, my name is Darius Jimerson, and I will be discussing what drug addiction is, how it happens, what we know about the crisis, why people use drugs, why people get addicted, and why is adolescence a critical time in preventing drug addiction. There's a ton of misinformation about opioid use out there, but chemical prescription opioids like Vicodin, Oxycontin are similar to heroin. In fact, the National Institute of Drug Abuse reports that nearly 80% of heroin users started with prescription opioid pills. America makes up less than 5% of the world's population, but in 2013, we consume more than 3/4 of the world's oxycodone. Every day, more than 115 people in the United States die after overdosing on opioids. The misuse of and addiction to opioids, including prescription pain relievers, heroin, and synthetic opioids such as fentanyl, is a serious national crisis that affects public health as well as social and economic welfare. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that a total economic burden of prescription opioid misuse alone in the United States is $78.5 billion a year. Let me repeat that. $78.5 billion a year, including the cost of healthcare, lost productivity, addiction treatment, and criminal justice involvement. So, what is drug addiction? Addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequences. It is considered to brain circuits involved in reward, stress, and self-control, and those changes may last a long time after a person stopped taking drugs. So how does it happen? In the late 1990s, pharmaceutical companies reassured the medical community that patients would not become addicted to prescription opioids or pain relievers, and healthcare providers began to prescribe them at greater risk. This subsequently led to widespread diversions and misuse of these medications before it became clear that these medications could indeed be highly addictive. Opioid overdose rates began to increase. In 2015, more than 33,000 Americans died as a result of opioid overdose, including prescription opioids, heroin, and illicitly manufactured fentanyl, powerful synthetic opioid. That year, an estimated 2 million people in the United States suffered from substance use disorders related to prescription opioid pain relievers, and 591,000 suffered from a heroin use disorder, not mentally exclusive. So what do we know about the opioid crisis? Roughly 21 to 29% of patients prescribed opioids for chronic pain misuse them. Between 8 and 10% develop a opioid use disorder. An estimated 4 to 6% who misuse prescription opioids transition to heroin. About 80% of people who use heroin first misuse prescription opioids. Opioid overdoses increased 30% from July 2016 through September of 2017 in 52 areas in 45 states. The Midwestern region saw opioid overdose increase 70% from July of 2016 through September of 2017. Opioid overdose in large cities increased by 54% in 16 states. So why do people use drugs? In general, people take drugs for various reasons. To feel good, drugs can provide an intense feeling of pleasure. This initial euphoria is followed by other effects which differ with the type of drugs used. For example, with stimulants such as cocaine, the high is followed by feelings of power, self-confidence, and increased energy. In contrast, the euphoria caused by opioids such as heroin is followed by the feeling of relaxation and satisfaction. And another reason they take them, to feel better. Some people who suffer from social anxiety, stress, and depression start using drugs so they feel less anxiety. Stress can play a major role in starting and continuing drug use, as well as relapse, which is just returning to drug use, and patients recovering from addiction. Another reason they use them to do better. Some people feel pressure to improve their focus in school or at work, their abilities in sports. This can play a role in trying or continuing to use drugs such as prescription stimulants or cocaine. Other people use them because of curiosity and social pressures. In this respect, teens are particularly at risk because peer pressure can be very strong. Teens are more likely than adults to act in risky or damaging ways to impress their friends, show their independence from parents and social rules. In taking drugs, many people feel good or better. So they think, what's the problem? So when they first start using the drug, people may perceive what seems to be positive effects. They also may believe that they can control their use. But drugs can quickly take over a person's life. Over time, if drugs use continues or pleasurable activities become less pleasurable and the person has to take the drugs just to feel normal, they have a hard time controlling their needs to take drugs, even though it causes many problems for themselves and their loved ones. Some people may start to feel like they need to take more of the drugs, and they take it more often, even in the early stages of their drug use. These are the tailgate signs of addiction. Even relatively moderate drug use poses dangers. Consider how a social drinker can become intoxicated, get behind the wheel of a car, and quickly turn a pleasurable activity into a tragedy that affects many lives. Occasionally, drug use, such as misusing an opioid to get high, can have similar effects, including overdose and dangerously impaired driving. So why do some people become addicted to drugs while others do not? There's no single factor that determines whether a person will become addicted to drugs. As with other diseases and disorders, the likelihood of developing an addiction differs from person to person, and no single factor determines whether a person will become addicted or not. In general, the more risk factor a person has, the greater the chance that taking drugs will lead to drug use and addiction. Protective factors, on the other hand, reduce a person's risk. Risk and protective factors may be either environmental or biological. So, what other factors increase the risk of addiction? Early use, obviously. Although taking drugs at an early age can lead to addiction, research has shown that the earlier a person begins to use drugs, the more likely he or she is to develop a serious problem. This may be due to harmful effects that the drug can have on developing brain. It also may result from a mix of early social and biological risk factors, including lack of a sustainable home or family, exposure to physical or sexual abuse, genes, or mental illnesses. Still, the fact remains that early use is a strong indicator of a problem ahead, including addiction. So, how are the drugs taken? Smoking a drug or injecting it into a vein increases the addictive potential. Both smoked and injected drugs enter the brain within seconds, becoming a powerful rush of pleasure. However, this intense high can fade within a few minutes. Scientists believe this starkly felt contrast drives some people to repeated drugs taken in an attempt to recapture that fleeting pleasurable state. So, why is adolescence a critical time for preventing drug abuse? As noted previously, early drug use increases a person's chances of becoming addicted. Remember, drugs change the brain, and this can lead to addiction and other serious problems. So preventing early use of drugs or alcohol may be a way in reducing these risks. Risk of drug use increases greatly during time of transition. For an adult, a divorce or a loss of a job may increase the risk of drug use. For a teenager, risky times, including moving, family divorces, or changing schools. When children advance from elementary through middle school, they face new challenges socially, family and academics, and academic situations. Often during this period, children are exposed to substances such as cigarettes, alcohol for the first time. When they enter high school, teens may encounter greater availability of drugs, drug use by older teens, and social activities where drugs are used. So, because the brain is still developing, using drugs at this age is more potential to disrupt brain functions in areas critical to motivation. So it's not surprising that teens who use alcohol and other drugs often have family and social problems, poor academic performance, health-related problems, including mental health conditions, and involvement with juvenile justice system. So I hope that I was able to provide you with some helpful information about opioid use, what drug addiction is, how it happens, what we know about the crisis, why people use drugs, why people get addicted, why is adolescence a critical time in preventing drugs, could be critical in obtaining help for your loved ones who might be suffering from this addiction. If you or somebody you know needs help, please reach out.